Okay, so I was saying I was out with Gina and we actually saw two people. We saw a woman wearing a wig and we saw a man wearing a toupee. And his toupee was beyond. It was I don't know what was going on, right? Very bad.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, just it didn't fit right. But she
right,
was saying, why is it okay for women to wear wigs that don't need to cover up something, right? Like
right.
she has a full head of hair, but she herself who's like, if I want to change my look, I put a wig on, right?
I mean,
Why
Luna
is it
does the
okay for
same
women?
thing.
Yeah. Why is it okay for women to wear wigs, but it's somehow embarrassing or shameful for men to put on a wig, aka a
Yeah,
toupee?
yeah. I mean, I feel like part of it is just the quality of product makes it so apparent, right? Like, like bad. It's like, you know, from watching Drag Race, like there are some wigs that you look at and you're like, oh, sweetheart, it's going to be so much better for you when you can afford a lace front. I mean,
Yes.
I think about just because we've been rewatching earlier seasons again, the first season that Shangela was on,
The first of seven times that she was on. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. I know
I
where
mean,
you're going.
her hair that first season was like, oh, oh no,
It's Party City wig. Yeah.
so so
Yeah.
bad.
That was a hand me down from somebody. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I think some of it is just like a lot of the toupees or hair pieces are they're just bad.
Yes. Agreed.
They're bad or they're placed poorly. It's like it's like they're placed too far back or too far down. I think that's the bigger sin with hair pieces. It's like nobody has that hairline.
No. No. Eddie Munster hairline, where it's like,
Yeah,
yeah.
like barely above your brow. Like nobody has that hairline.
Yeah.
You need some forehead.
And the
And there's the
and
whole thing with male pattern hair, right? So you have that little bit like right here, right? So if you get a hairpiece that eliminates that completely, it looks weird.
and in the back, if you've got, like if I didn't shave my head, I'd have the ring of fire, right? So
Like my
if I
little
yeah, if I grow that out and then put a toupee on top of it, you can tell the difference
right,
between this hair and my hair, right? This hair sticks out a little
right,
bit, and then you can see their hair underneath. It's never the same color, right? So they don't
right.
they don't shave what they do have. They just put a toupee on top of what they don't have. Um,
Yeah,
and then there's a cheap look to that, I think.
yeah, yeah. So I think that's part of the problem because there are certainly hairpieces that look good. I mean, if you look at people in movies
We
like
talked about Sean
Sean
Connery.
Connery
Yeah.
or uh, Bruce Willis when he first started losing his hair and they put hair pieces on him. Like, it's like, dude, we all know that you're bald
Burt Reynolds.
or
Yeah.
balding.
Yeah.
Like, come on. Um, but I, but there is this weird like stigma about being bald. It is weird to me. On top of it, like, I mean, there's a reason that like Hair Club for Men or the companies that do hair plugs do so well. Or the what's that product that's like a microfilament that you like sprinkle on what hair you have
Oh
left
yeah. Yeah.
and it's supposed to like fill in the
Fill in.
patches. There's a cut there's a so the permanent makeup people that like fill in brows with
Mhm.
like microblading tattoos. They can do that for hair as well, which I often think is like why would you do that? because now you're going to have like weird tattooing that doesn't look like a tattoo. You're going to keep losing hair. Like,
Are they just going to keep filling it in as it
are you
goes?
just going to keep tattooing your head?
There was a gay porn star like 10, 15 years ago, and I think he was German. I can't remember his name, but he was bald and he had a full head tattoo. Like,
That, okay, cool.
so it was just a
But like
dark,
the
like,
microblading that makes it look like you have little pieces of hair seems not a good plan to me.
yeah. But and here's my question is we've talked about that for me being bald is just boring. I can't I can't ever change it. I don't care that I'm bald. It's an
Right.
inconvenience in California because my head either burns off or my head is sweaty because I'm wearing a hat. That's inconvenient, but whatever, right?
Right.
I'm not ashamed of being bald. I'm not embarrassed of being bald. It's just boring.
Yeah.
It's boring. I had cool hair. I miss my having cool hair. I had a great pompadour, right? Like you had this thick head of
Yeah.
hair, right?
Yeah.
So if I am just bored and I just want to change my look, the way the way my wife does, if she just wants to change her look, puts a wig on, everyone's like, that's fun. But if I'm bored and I want to put a wig on, suddenly I'm that guy who wears a toupee. Oh my God. Right.
Right.
And it's a
Yeah.
thing. Like, why is it a thing for men to put a wig on?
Well, I mean, so which is interesting because it's like, you look through history of fashion, right? So there was a time where all men wore wigs,
Right.
right? And the more elaborate and the larger your wig, the higher your heel, the more elaborate your clothing, the makeup that you wore to make your, especially for European men, to make themselves even whiter than they already were, and then have a little beauty mark.
Yeah.
That was like the height of masculinity. And yet, if you were to dress in that kind of way today, people would think you were incredibly effeminate and
Fop.
were
Right.
to be mocked, right? So just the changing flavor of what is perceived of as being masculine or being fashionable, at least according to Western standards,
Hmm.
uh, has really shifted over, what, 200-300 years, right? I mean, you look back to the founding fathers, they all wore wigs except for Ben Franklin,
Mm-hmm.
but it was also a thing to have long hair and
Right.
wear it in a ponytail with a ribbon.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that all shifts, right? So it's interesting. Like, when did baldness become equated with a negative?
And that's the rub of it, right? Like
Right.
that higher testosterone levels are linked to being bald, right?
Right. You
So
tend to have more beard and body hair,
right. So there's not a
but
lack of
no,
testosterone. It's not you're not manly enough, but somehow we've now equated being bald with being wimpy or being
or unattractive.
unattractive, right?
And it's
And
like, I get plenty of play being a bald guy, so I'm not really sure what that's all about.
yeah, yeah, I'm doing all
But
right.
then, but then, we were talking before about, like, we hear about, okay, so like the Jason Stathams of the world, or um,
Vin Diesel,
Vindy, or
The
The
Rock,
Rock,
yeah,
right? Oh, he's really a handsome bald guy. He's really hot as a bald guy.
quantified, right? Like
It's always quantified, yeah. But like, we don't say, oh, he's really hot for a tall guy.
right, right, right.
But we do say he's hot for being a fat guy,
Yeah. Or he may be short, but he's really hot.
or he's got a dad bod, but he's still hot. Still hot.
Still hot. Not he's just hot.
Right.
Yeah.
Which I also think is a big difference between queer culture and pet culture, right? Because, like, within queer culture, bears have their own market, basically. Being a big, furry, bald person with meatiness is a sought after quality.
Yeah.
Or being an otter is a sought after quality with its own language around building that hotness, right? Like, if I'm in gay male spaces, I still feel really attractive, right? Because I have a particular look that's really sought after. I'm older, I'm hairy, and I have a belly
And a bald head.
and a bald head. Those things make me a particular demographic of desirability, right? But if I were to go to a straight bar, I don't have that same level of desirability amongst the women that I would potentially be attracted to. Because in that world, I'm seen as somehow, I don't even know what. Like, there's something about those qualities that are not desirable for straight women.
And interesting too that if we see images of gay culture in mainstream media, right?
Mhm.
Whether it's supportive or anti or indifferent or whatever, we see caricatures, right? We see
Right,
either the ripped little twink, the a hot, usually white ripped guy, okay,
right.
or we
Yeah,
see a big bear. Like that's their otherness, our otherness to straight media and culture are these
right,
caricatures
right,
because that aesthetic is not that bear, that big body, that dad bod, whatever, right? Is not, like
right,
you said, it's not red on their radars as particularly hot. But in gay
right.
culture,
And what's interesting to me is if I see images of bigger bodied, hairy men, it can almost with it, and that's all you get, right? Is just a
mhm,
picture. Big, hairy man of in their, say, 40s to 60s. I can probably look at 10 images and tell you which of those 10 images somebody is queer versus somebody is het.
yep, yep,
There's something inherently sexy about the way that queer people present themselves.
yeah.
And, like, if I see the same body type, the same sort of image, but it's a straight guy, it's not as attractive to me.
This is I truly believe this is the gift that queer people bring to the rest of the world. Y'all need to calm the fuck down about sexuality, right?
Right?
Just relax. Just relax. You've got so much religious programming, and you really are really wanting to hold on to our puritanical roots as white people in this country, right? Sexuality is
Yeah,
bad. I think queer people are just like, it's not that big of a deal, y'all, which is
right.
really sexy and attractive, right?
It is. It
Yeah.
is. And also just to embrace the fact that being in a bigger body can be sexy, but there's a level of care, I think. about the way that queer people present themselves, right? So it's like taking that extra step of grooming your beard, taking good care of it, shaving your head instead of just sort of letting it be whatever, um,
Hmm.
wearing clothes that are complementary to you, and also not being afraid of color. Like, like saying, as a bigger bodied person, I don't have to be limited to navy blue or black.
Oh, are you calling me out? I'm literally wearing a navy blue.
Well, and I'm wearing gray.
Yeah.
So, but
I hear you.
you know what I'm saying? It's like
Yeah.
queers are still willing to be colorful
Yeah,
and stand out. And that brings a level of sexiness to it.
absolutely. And yeah, it's just again, it's a vibe that is at simultaneously so easy to point out the differences between queer and cishet, and yet so hard to really pinpoint what it is, right? Like it's
Right. It's like I know it when I see it, which is
yes,
terrible.
I know, but it works. There's just
Yeah.
and I think it's an openness. I think the vibe of queer
Yeah.
sexuality is way more open, way more curious, way more fun, right?
Right.
If you're gonna punish us for how we do it, well then great. I'm gonna go down in a blaze of glory, right? Like,
And I feel like somebody like Dwayne Johnson or somebody like Jason Statham, they're also people who embrace that kind of openness, right? And granted, to some extent, that's about being an actor and having to be willing to embody different kinds of expression, right?
yeah.
You're also looking at men who have both participated in hyper masculine sport.
Hmm.
I mean, Jason Statham started out as a kickboxer, you
Hmm.
know, and yet they have found this way of really embracing a broader expression of masculinity, right? Like one of the things that I appreciate about Jason Statham in the Fast and Furious franchise and in the Hobbs and Shaw movie, right, is there's a scene in one of them where he's coaching his daughter's soccer team, right? And he's got these agents that are talking to him about, well, we want you to come in and do this job. And he's like, listen, right now, I have my daughter's game to worry about. And like later, we're going for mani pedis. And then, you know,
Yeah.
we're gonna do we're gonna go to a Taylor Swift concert, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And just being able to embrace like, listen, there's a broader viewpoint here. And also, I'm here to empower this young woman in my life. And then there's a haka, which is awesome because then you have this other team of like little white girls who are just like flabbergasted that there's this other team of girls that's pretty diverse that are doing a haka. And I mean, like there's a lot of things to unpack in that scene, which are so great about um, empowering girls, but also as a man being like, "Hey, I'm going to take all of these girls out for mani pedis," which implies I'm also going to get one.
And here's the difference between masculinity and patriarchy, right?
Right.
Like he's
Yes.
a masculine
Yes.
dude. The, his vibe
No
is
question.
masculine,
Yeah.
right?
No
Like,
question.
he's a man's man. But that doesn't mean he can't be a good dad and care about women's soccer and mani pedis, right? But the patriarchy says you can only be a man this way, right?
Right.
So toxic masculinity isn't really. I'm almost thinking we need another phrase for it because it's not it's not the worst parts of masculinity. It's just patriarchy. It's
Yeah.
just, you
Yes.
know,
Yeah.
it's just patriarchy that says you have to be a man this way and all of that. So,
Well, and again, so that begs the question, right, of when did that shift occur? When when and how did fashion and the portrayal of masculinity shift?
well, in Western culture, you know, Gina just told me this fashion nugget history that pink used to be a man's color because they
Right.
thought it was too emotional for women. It was
No,
too,
it was too active.
or did you tell me? Yeah, it was too
I
active.
told you it's too
Yeah, you
active.
did.
Yeah, it's
For
too active for
yeah.
girls.
So we switched away from that. Clearly,
In
we're on the
like
other side.
the early part of the 20th century.
Yeah.
So I mean that's a
But
recent shift.
let's think back too. What Fred Astaire was a man's man. And he was a tap
Absolutely.
dancer, a thin,
Exactly.
Gene Kelly was it. He
Yeah.
was a dancer and a singer,
You
right?
know, and
That
and even when, I was just thinking about that and like in terms of men's fashion, if we look at say the 30s, 40s and into the 50s even, it was tightly cut suits. There was a lot of like nipped in waist to
yep.
create more of a waist, defined waist. High-waisted pants, um, which are slimming to everyone.
Hmm.
Um, you know, as a man, you wore a hat everywhere. And so you changed your look by having a different hat.
Yeah. Okay.
And
So
then
was it?
somewhere around the time that we get television,
Mhm.
things change on some levels, but not completely. Because I mean, for you and me growing up in the 60s and 70s, what were the images of men that we saw on TV? Like you saw Mike Brady on the Brady Bunch, who went from being sort of stodgy at the beginning of the series, and then as it progressed, like wearing more and more colorful clothing. And you've seen the ads of clothes from the early 70s for men. It's just a horrifying era of jumpsuits and Kiana fabric and all of that.
Angel flight pants. That's what I remember. Angel flight pants.
Yeah,
They horribly uncomfortable and ugly. And I remember at the time I was like, ooh, ooh. Yeah.
yeah,
Hate
you know,
tie. Yeah.
yeah, but hairy chests were in,
Mustaches.
mustaches were in. Not beards so much, but mustaches at least.
Yeah.
And then somewhere in the 80s, it suddenly like moved to shaving all your body hair.
Hmm.
And then by the 90s, we're in this like muscle culture that it's like all color needs to be drained from men's clothing.
And what's fascinating to me is long hair. Long hair for men in the 60s meant one thing. Long hair for men in the 70s meant something. Long hair in the 80s meant something. Long hair in the 90s meant something. And yet they didn't mean the same thing across those time
Right,
periods,
right,
right?
exactly.
I mean, I look at James Hetfield from Metallica, right?
Right,
80s hair god, right?
right, right.
Cuts it all off in the 90s and his fans lose their minds, but I think he looked banging hot in the 90s, right?
Yeah,
Because long hair went from being metal rock and roll outlaw to something else in the
Right.
90s. And so the outlaws didn't want to look like what long hair meant anymore, right? So it became like these 90s sensitive guys wore long hair, right? Like
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I think of the guy from the Crash Test Dummies. He had almost a bob, right? Like that 90s guy, long hair, sensitive,
Right.
artistic
Yeah.
guy. So
Yeah.
manly men didn't have long hair anymore.
Right.
And now we're kind of going back to that where it's outlaw to have long hair, right?
Yeah.
Or you know, man bun is now sensitive, but long hair is rock and roll. So
Right.
so the meanings keep changing. And
It's
maybe
really
that's
interesting.
yeah, maybe that's the constant. I just thought maybe it was, pre-war, post-war masculinity as a, I wasn't alive for World War II, but
Right.
looking
Well, neither
it's
was I,
like,
but
yeah, it just seems like masculinity, American masculinity changed after the war. And maybe television
I think so.
propelled that, right? It gave us
Right.
westerns, it gave us war shows.
True. I mean, we definitely got sort of the whole both spaghetti westerns via Italian filmmakers' ideas about American masculinity via the vehicle of Clint Eastwood,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And a lot of those were the movies that I grew up watching. And not just Clint Eastwood, but like there was that whole raft of westerns, right? So there was 100 Rifles, there was um Hanny Calder, there was Jeremiah Johnson, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Like those were
Jeremy.
all of the kinds of movies that influenced what kind of man I wanted to grow up to be.
Did you like horses? Because it's I just saw the Barbie movie, so I'm like, oh yeah, horses and
Yeah,
mini fridge. Yeah, that's a
yeah,
man.
that's a man. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, but very much that sort of um, self-sufficient um, loner,
Mhm.
um,
Yeah.
rugged,
Capable.
capable, sometimes a little enigmatic or um, just sort of quietly observant, you know. And I was definitely, if you look at like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, I was definitely more Robert Redford than Paul
Paul
Newman,
Newman.
right? Like Paul Newman was the one who was more outgoing, more easy with a quip,
Personality.
um,
Mm.
have more personality, and Robert Redford, both in Butch and Sundance, but also later in Jeremiah Johnson, is this very sort of quiet, uh, not quite brooding in Butch and Sundance, but certainly in Jeremiah Johnson is much more sort of this brooding character, right?
Mhm.
And and I felt very connected to that somehow.
And I don't think it's a coincidence in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid that Robert Redford's character had a love interest. Paul Newman's didn't, right? So Robert Redford's character can get women and get love. He can get attention. He can get right.
Well, yeah, Etta,
Yeah.
you know, but then Butch was, I mean, essentially they were I mean, in the way that they were portrayed in the movie, they're basically a
Yeah. Yeah. There was real love between all of them. You're right. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
And I think the legacy of that is that it's complicated what it means to be a man. And again, it's the patriarchy, right? You have to be quiet and brooding. You don't need anybody. You've got it figured out. You're capable of doing it all. And if you can't live up to that standard, then of course you're going to hate yourself and not think you're a man enough and all that. So
right.
again, it's not masculinity, it's patriarchy. It's
Yeah.
just
And somehow baldness plays a role.
it does. It does. Because the patriarchy says we aren't. virile. That's what it is. We're not virile as bald men.
Which
We're
is ridiculous because we're actually more.
yes, yeah.
So the lesson, kids, is if you want the manliest man, go find the bald guys.
Get the bald man. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But trans guys who are scared of going bald pre-transition, right?
Yeah.
Like you
What are
can't,
you
you
afraid
can't,
of?
you can't pick and choose.
Nope.
And yeah, I think just because maybe getting raised, if everyone thinks you're female, you're raised with messages that you don't have to worry about that. So I guess maybe it's a
Right.
worry hadn't considered before. Maybe I don't know. I didn't think I would go bald. I was like, I'm not going to go bald. I'm not going to go bald. No, nobody in my mom's side of the family. It's the X chromosome. I'm not going to go bald. I'm stupid. Nobody's bald on my mom's side, so I'm fine. My dad was bald. So when I started losing my hair, I was like, the hell is happening? My buddy was like, dude, it's on the X chromosome, and you have two of them. I was
Yeah.
like, yeah, I didn't even think about that. So it was shocking to me when I went bald. I was like, this can't be happening just because.
I was sort of prepared for it, although none of the men on either side of my family are bald. They had thinning hair,
Yeah,
but nobody was flat out bald on either side of my family. Um, but I'm also the hairiest person on either side of my family.
you just hit the jackpot.
You got, the Viking throwback genes.
Yeah, good for you. Yeah, I'd rush personally for me. It's just for me. It's my own preference. I'm happy that I can grow a beard and less sad that I went bald. Right. Again, the only thing I don't like about being bald is it's monotonous and it either burns or it sweats. That's the only thing.
Well,
Right.
there's that part.
Yeah.
At least I live someplace where I can legit wear hats most of the year without completely roasting to death. But yeah, warm climates and trying to wear a hat, which I try to do anyway, just to, reduce my risk of skin cancer. But
Yes.
it's hot and sweaty,
It's hot and
which
sweaty.
also begs the question of like, why would I want to throw a wig on top of that? Like, that seems not a good plan for me.
Fact. Yeah. Yeah. That is just one giant carpet covering. Yeah. I guess I just wish it was just as fun for a bald guy to throw a wig on for funsies as it was for women to throw a wig on, right?
Well, you
Nobody,
should start a
nobody. I should be the Beyonce. Nobody gives a shit that Beyonce wears wigs. Nobody cares. I
Nobody
mean,
cares. Nobody cares.
am I comparing myself to Beyonce? No. There's many, many, many differences between her and I, but nobody cares that she wears a wig. So I should be able
Exactly.
to wear a wig. Fuck it. I'll wear a
You
wig.
should. Yeah,
Yeah. Maybe I'll
absolutely.
start that trend.
You should start the trend.
Yeah.
Be a trendsetter.
Then we can get beard wigs for guys who don't have beards. Is that a thing? Can we make that a thing?
Like a face merkin? Okay.
There could be money there. There's gold in those hills. We just
There
haven't
could
mined
be. And if you need to know what a merkin is, Google is your friend.
it. Look it up. But I think face merkin is just what we'll call it. It's a face. Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Terrible. Yeah.